The next session is called Artist and Artist Advocate Perspectives on AI, Copyright, and the Future of Work. We have two great panelists today. Rebecca Blake is an advising liaison for the Graphics Arts Guild and also a design director at Optimum Design and Consulting. And Stephen Zapata is a professional designer, illustrator, and educator. And so we'll start with Rebecca. Please take it away.
So, it's a pleasure being here, and let me see if I can get through. Great. I'm going to gallop through my slides so we can get to the questions as quickly as possible, but I first want to introduce you guys to the Graphic Artists Guild. We are a trade association for graphic artists, designers, illustrators of all types, people in related industries, visual artists of all types. We actually got our start in the 1960s in Detroit as a labor union. So our focus has always been on protecting the economic, social, and professional interests of our members. How can our graphic artists be paid fairly for their work and have rewarding, meaningful careers? So that means we delve into the nitty-gritty, boring work of copyrights and labor and business practices. We're not sexy, but we do try to be effective. We engage in lobbying, both locally and in DC on behalf of graphic artists, typically on copyright and labor-related practices. We also engage with the Copyright Office. We advocate for an inclusive copyright registration system and for policies which protect individual creators and small businesses so that our copyright system works for us and not just large corporations. We also join amicus briefs and in fact submitted a brief in support of the photographer Lynn Goldsmith in the recent Warhol v. Goldsmith Supreme Court case. And we educate graphic artists on best practices and work to create an inclusive, supportive community. We also publish the Graphic Artists Guild Handbook of Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. It's probably what we are best known for. It's considered the industry Bible on trade and professional practices, and it's published by MIT Press. So where are we? While the advent of generative AI has rocked the art world, this development has to be viewed within a larger framework of how artists have fared in recent decades, as the internet and technology have changed how we work, collaborate, and communicate. One simple metric to look at is how much are artists earning. So the Graphic Artists Guild records the reported incomes of artists in our handbook. And from comparing records back to 2003 and adjusting for cost of living increases, those records indicate that for illustrators, wages have stagnated. How is this possible? This has occurred even as technology has provided significant advancements and new opportunities. Technology is agnostic. Those opportunities for sharing and communicating have also enabled the outright theft of those creative works. Copyright infringement has been rampant since the advent of the internet, and the impact on artists' livelihoods is real. Artists who attempt to assert their copyrights online are often told they're being greedy, or that they're not true artists, or that they're simply ignored and told, so sue me. The Graphic Artists Guild surveys artists on copyright infringements, and we gather case studies, so we have direct evidence of this. Artists are largely unprotected in an online environment in which many platforms, including the social media platforms that artists leverage for marketing their skills, strip out the metadata that contains their copyright management information. And the Digital Millennium Copyright Act process, the DMCA process by which artists can have their infringing works removed from a website or platform, is a joke, commonly referred to as internet whack-a-mole. Companies valued in the billions have been built on the backs of creators, look at Facebook or Instagram, and yet creators' copyright, their fundamental constitutional right to control their work, is largely ignored or devalued. So where are we now that generative AI platforms have been rolled out for almost a year? There is a huge divide in the artist community. Some artists strongly feel that the unethical use of artists' works in the development of the technology means that these platforms should be avoided, at least until artists are remunerated. Others have adopted AI and are enthusiastic users. At the Graphic Artists Guild, we've heard from artists from both sides of the divide. But the majority of members who have shared their practices with us are hesitant to use AI beyond a tool for ideation. We do have a few members who use AI as a tool in creating works. For example, by inputting their works into the system, constructing a series of text prompts, curating the results, and going through an iterative process of developing works on platform, taking the results off platform and further manipulating them, and then even building their own data sets and writing their own code for fine-tuning. As for the economic effects of generative AI, at this early stage, we don't have data on the economic effects. But we've heard from some artists, from some members, that AI has permitted them to take on larger projects, and we have a member who is employed in the industry in a newly created position. But we also heard from other artists who've seen significant loss of income. Artists in some industries are reluctant to go public with their experiences because they're afraid of backlash from clients and losing what work they are still getting, or they sign NDA agreements. Generative AI promises efficiency, which often translates to a workforce reduction, which we've also seen. One of our members, in fact, was able to cut the number of designers they outsourced to by using AI. The Graphic Artists Guild Board recently developed a position on generative AI, recognizing that this position is a live document which will undoubtedly be revised as the technologies and policies developed around it evolve. The Guild's position from the outset is that from the outset of AI, generative AI, is that the scraping of images into data sets used to develop this technology is a copyright infringement and is not a fair use. And I'd like to remind the audience, illustrators work in a fair use environment. We leverage fair use. We create derivative works. We are not anti-fair use, but there needs to be a bar that is set. This stance is a continuation of longstanding Guild position on any unauthorized use of copyrighted works. Artists must be compensated for the use of their works in AI data sets. Additionally, any use of imagery for generative technology data sets must be expressly permitted by the artist. It is not sufficient to scrape works first and ask for a permission or a license later. Any policies and legislation that is developed to regulate the use and functioning of generative AI must come from the perspective that the interests of human creators must come first. This includes the development of collective licensing schemes whereby artists are compensated for the authorized use of their works for generative AI. Additionally, artists must be better protected in an online environment. This protection is long overdue. A simple legislative fix would be to change Section 1202 of copyright law, the section regarding the removal of copyright management information or metadata, so that the removal of that information is simply not permitted. Lastly, no legislation or policy should permit technology developers to use copyrighted works with impunity. Art, music, text, moving images, and other creative works are not simply data. They are the culmination of a lifetime spent in education, developing skills, investing in careers, and evolving a unique voice. The generative AI platforms have stated that they see their technology as a valuable tool for artists, and we're glad to hear that and would like to engage as valued stakeholders. But for AI image generators to truly contribute to the work lives of artists, they need to develop guardrails. Only ethically and legally sourced works should be used for data sets. Artists spend their creative lives developing and honing their unique styles. Users of AI platforms should not be permitted to ape the styles of copyrighted works, since doing so floods the public space with works in a distinctive style, effectively obliterating the original artist's uniqueness. AI generative platforms should be technology leaders in preserving metadata on platform. The technology should read and respond to the information the artist has embedded in that metadata. That includes recognizing whether an artist has actively indicated that a work is licensed for use in AI. Lastly, generative AI platforms should educate their users in the ethical and legal use of their platforms, and this education should be active, not, for example, the passive burying of cautions about using copyrighted works deep in the terms of use, which nobody reads anyways. So how do we find a path forward? The Guild is working on several fronts. We're part of a broader coalition of creators organizations, including writers, composers, and lyricists, photographers, and other visual arts associations who've pulled our efforts in protecting creators' interests. We're meeting with members of Congress and with the Copyright Office to express our concerns and share possible solutions we see to protect artists. And we're developing policies, ethical guidelines, and best practices for graphic artists within our community. What we really want is what creators have always wanted: credit for the work we do, our consent for the use of our work, and compensation for the tremendous value we bring. Many thanks to the Society of Composers and Lyricists for the catchphrase, yes, it is used with permission. Ultimately, for our visual culture to continue to develop, the artists who are the true innovators, the individuals who invested their educations and their careers, who put up with harsh criticism and professional failure, and who've had the tenacity and the drive to develop their craft in their careers, need to be respected and valued. AI image generators would not be where they are today without having leveraged the labor of artists. That needs to be recognized, compensated, and protected.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to advance here. Whoops, let's go back. So I don't have much for you in the way of slides today, but I did just want to show you some of my personal work. In situations like this, I always feel like just showing what I'm willing to spend 100 hours on, 200 hours on, often says a lot more about me than what I might say. So clearly, yes, I am an artist, but really what I am is someone who draws, right? These are all pencil drawings. These are my favorite thing in the world to do. The 100 hours that I spend on them are 100 joyful hours. I do not consider drawing to be a slog. I don't think anybody needs to experience it as a slog. I'm as happy as I ever am in the effort of making these things. So yes, art, widely construed, is not really my vocation. My vocation is drawing, is making images by hand, even though I do love art in a broader sense. Now, am I being pedantic here? No, I don't think so. I want to be very specific with my terms because I think that we confuse our discourse when we use a broad word like art in discussions like these. I think that that conflates far too many practices, technologies, industries, philosophies when we use that word, and that problem then extends to when we talk about generative art or AI art. And that makes it difficult for me then in turn to be clear about what I am for and what I am against. So, in the sake of clarity, what I am against is the widely distributed commercial text-to-image models like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E 2. These programs that I consider to be appropriating the hard work and effort and IP and copyright of everybody on the internet and seemingly feeling perfectly entitled to that. That is the narrow alley of my ire. And there are many people who agree with me. I have nothing against generative models as such. I have nothing against people who write code that then goes on to produce procedural images. I have nothing against people who slave over their own data sets and then use that to train a diffusion model or any other kind of model, kind of like previous speaker Caroline with Anna Ridler. And I have absolutely no interest in saying what is or isn't art. I don't like that when I voice resistance to AI art, it seems like I am casting aspersions on all of those other groups. I am not. And I do not want to undermine the efforts of truly creative people in the AI sector. I just want the people who are making these broad generative art models to do so ethically. And that is not something that I see with any of the current commercial models. They use our labor to train tools that will compete directly against us in our very markets with, as has been said, no credit, no consent, no compensation, and seemingly not honoring that we would have any right to determine how our work is used. I want to be clear that I am also including in that open source products. I do think open source may be important in the future, but right now, in a context with no protections and no guardrails, Open source is instead propagating these issues on the widest scale instead of protecting people. Now, because of that, I do find these models to be conceptually flawed at their core. And so I do view them as something akin to poison trees that are only going to produce poisoned fruit. Now, of course, I must acknowledge that there are many diverse applications for these technologies, and their capability to do good is clear. Certainly in a room like this, we all see the possibilities for them to do good. But we have to acknowledge that all of the good things we can imagine doing with these systems, we can imagine doing with a version of them that does not view human creators as a resource to be strip-mined. And that is what I believe is the key difference between this moment and other moments of technological upheaval, like when photography started disrupting oil painting, for example. Photography did not rely on oil painting. No one needed to walk into a gallery and take pictures of oil paintings to make better cameras. These technologies, on the other hand, are going to displace work, are going to displace income, are going to displace families by training off of us. If you cannot see how that is problematic, if you want to go laugh about that on the internet, I don't know what to say to you. I mean, that just strikes me as having the ethical intuitions of a hyena, basically. On the job front, I am a commercial designer. I've been a commercial designer for a long time. So I'm going to come to the job question from that angle. I've worked in video games, movies, theme parks, things like that. I want to be clear. These are awesome jobs. I think that gets lost in these discussions sometimes. These are life-affirming jobs for a lot of people. People reorient their entire lives to try to get these jobs. Are they stressful? Sure. Anything can be made stressful if you put it on a deadline. But if you love to draw and paint, like I do, these are jobs that allow you to do that. Designing cool characters and cool places for exciting projects is a great way and a rare way to make $1 if you love to sketch and paint. Now, if we don't do anything here, I foresee these jobs and jobs like them being transformed into something largely unrecognizable and very boring. And I don't mean prompting. I don't imagine them being replaced by prompting. I do not think people will be prompting for very long. A few multimodal auto-GPT agents utilizing a text-to-image function will be able to create more art than all of the artists in the world combined per day. They'll completely wash us out. And I think that soon we will see projects that have all of their design decisions made by an auto-GPT art director based entirely on budget, comparables, trend analysis, and target markets. Correcting that agent may come to be seen as a job in the creative industries, but you would be a fool to believe that. That is my #1 worry. The complete automation of art with no humans involved. Just market research automatically manifesting itself infinitely. My greatest worry is that this will usher in an era of what I think of as bespoke art. So these are videos, images, songs, games, what have you, that are automatically generated for you based on your interests, your personal life events, biometric signals, your mood as your watch is tracking it, whatever it is. I think that we saw the first versions of this with the Lensa AI avatar app that flashed in the pan recently. But as things continue, it might look something like a song generated for you in the voice and style of your favorite artist that is about your actual recent breakup. And in the song, they might actually use the name of your ex. It might be Harry Styles saying the name of your ex in this song. And if it's hooked up to your social media, it could reference real events that happened between you and this person. Now, I call this bespoke art, but I don't think art is the right word. I don't think we have a word for what that would be. These would be highly energetic, highly refined, hyper-tailored pieces of content that would be generated and viewed in complete privacy. Another person doesn't need to make it, and no one ever needs to know that you consumed it. I don't think we have an analog for that, and we have no idea how our brains would react if that becomes prevalent. Now, people say that people will always want to see art made by a human, and I don't doubt that that is true. It just doesn't seem like it will add up to much if we don't get a grip on all of this. It's easy to foresee us landing in a future where it is impossible to tell if something was made by a person or made by a machine. And I think that in that context, it wouldn't be long before people just stop caring and assume that everything is made by a machine. That sounds like a disaster to me. And if bespoke art comes around, then human art will be in direct competition with this intimately personal, refined, automatically generated content that can be generated on demand. At least to me, it's clear what direction our tainted attention economy would go in that situation. Now, in the end, what we stand to lose, I think, is also what will bring people back to crafts like drawing, my beloved craft of drawing. This is all going nowhere fun fast. People are going to get completely drunk off of this endless, way too present AI art, and the hangover is going to be brutal. Bespoke art, should it arise, will be the ad absurdum of content. The market saturation and the churn that it will produce will leave all art ringing hollow, no matter how erudite the gallery plaque. Because of this, I do believe people will return to things like drawing because it is experiential, because it is intentional, specifically because it is slow. It doesn't just produce product, but it also changes the way that you see the world. Crafts like drawing are lifelong partners. They are complete paths that transform us as we walk them. They allow us to see truth and to know the world we're in for what it is. Nothing good gets into a drawing by accident. If you want beautiful light, you must understand light. If you want beautiful shadows, you must understand shadows. If you want beautiful shapes, you must understand beautiful shapes. Drawing has taught me so much. Really, I think it has taught me everything in my life. And it has given me gifts that I don't think I would have got otherwise, like discipline, patience, self-awareness, and compassion. And as it gave me those, it also reduced stress, fear, and existential angst. And all of those are palliatives that we are going to need if we fail to claim the future for human creativity. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both for some great comments. I just want to go to the online listeners to make sure that they feel heard. So I'm just going to ask the first question from Alberto. If some engineers would like to create a startup to generate images like your drawings, would you give them credit and consent? And what would be the price? What would be the form of compensation?
Yeah, I'm assuming that's specifically at me. Okay.
It says Zapata, yes.
Okay, so, well, my position here is interesting because I do want to advocate for a lot of what Rebecca has been talking about, what a lot of other people on these panels have been talking about. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily am willing to go down that path and that aligns for me in my practice and the way that I view art. And I think that as has been discussed in many of these panels, the idea is that I should have the ability to control that. I should have the ability to say what will and will not be done with my art, and I should not be forced to contribute to systems that I don't agree with or that don't align with my artistic philosophy. So I do think a situation like what is being asked there is probably farther down the line. I think that there's other questions to be handled here. I think that just given the nature of the space right now, if I'm perfectly honest, it is difficult for me to trust anyone establishing a company like that. So right now, yeah, I don't think I would go that way. I don't think I would go that way.
Do you have anything to add from the Guild's perspective?
The Graphic Artists Guild supports exactly what Steve said. It is the artist's right to determine what is done with their work. It's a constitutional right.
So the next question online I think is very interesting. It refers, well, let me just read the question first. Don't artists learn from copying prior masters? And therefore, this is the online question, not my question. Should the descendants of Da Vinci, for example, be paid by all the students who sketch his pictures as part of learning? And I think this does get to the big issue of, people have said that all art is derivative and reactive to the previous art that came before it. How do we think about all this in the context of today's discussions?
I think it's a false argument. And there's several reasons. Well, first of all, no, Da Vinci's heirs shouldn't be compensated because he died more than 70 years ago. But the second thing is, yes, every single artist learns. People fall in love with art usually or very often because they fall in love with something they've seen that an artist has done. And it's very typical as a student that you start imitating artists and you develop your craft that way. You copy styles and you copy what you love. But eventually, your creative drive, your ego, your vision takes over, and you develop your own style. And this happens naturally and organically. And if it doesn't happen naturally and organically, and you become a professional artist, it sure damn well happens because your peers are going to call you out for copying. So you've got professional practices that say you need to have your own voice, you need to respect other artists, but you also have, as a creator, your whole point is to express yourself. So sure, to an extent, art is derivative. Artists create derivative works. This is why fair use exists. But there's a line that's set. It doesn't mean that, well, because somebody has done something vaguely like this before, therefore everything is fair use. That's not the case at all.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I do tend to resist the assertion at the ground level. I think it's totally reductive. It's a false equivalence to say that the way the machines learn is the way that we learn. I mean, I teach a lot of students, and I could bring every student I've ever had into the same room, and if I asked them, did anybody here experience their path of learning how to draw as a series of statistical and probabilistic conclusions based off of the correlations of pixel arrangements to words? Not a person would raise their hand. That is not how people experience learning. They experience confusion. They experience fear. They experience moments of incredible uplift. They experience philosophical insight, especially if they are interfacing with something like art on a deep level. And it is, I know this is a strange concept to grapple with, but I think we could all agree, like, the process of learning something really sophisticated like that ennobles a person. And there is no ennobling a machine that has no consciousness, no sentience, and no real agency. Also, from the point of from a teacher, I think that it's also useful to look at this from, I consider teaching to just be another part of the learning process. I think it's somewhere everyone should go if they're really committed to a path in the long term. And from the point of a teacher, that all falls apart. When a student interfaces with me, I don't just give them conclusions, right? I beg them questions. I ask them to differ from me. I ask them to not agree with me. I ask them to come to their own conclusions. And we do share insight and philosophy and eurekas and things like this, and they educate me in return. And that process is completely lost in the process of machine learning.
Great. So now we do have time for live audience questions. And there'll be a mic which will show up magically.
Thank you. I 100% sympathize with your situation, but copyright law is not on your side. Because for reasons you just said, copyright, you don't train with images or documents. You train with high-dimensional token vectors and with pixel arrays. So there's no expression you can point to saying, that's what you took. So even though it sort of was taken metaphorically, literally it was not taken. And that's going to be a fundamental problem for copyright law to overcome to protect your situation. I'm sorry.
Could I respond to that?
Yes, that's the whole idea.
I'm not a technologist. I'm not a copyright lawyer. I'm a graphics designer. If anybody need a logo? But from our understanding of what's happening is, whether or not copyright law is on our side, we're going to find out. What we do believe is there is at some point in the quote-unquote ingestion of quote-unquote data, which is, by the way, images, it's not ones and zeros, it's our images, into the system. By that, somewhere, there has to have been some form of copying, and we'd love a little bit of transparency on what occurs. That act in and of itself is a use, an unauthorized use of our material. The response often is, yes, but it's non-expressive copying. That doesn't make sense to us as artists, because our artwork is nothing but expressive. You can't distill what we have done to non-expressive elements. If you're saying it's a non-expressive element because it's just learning this is what an arm looks like, this is what a boy with a balloon looks like, this is what a cloud looks like, the artist used expression in creating their images of arms and boys with balloons and clouds, the line quality, the color choice, the lighting choice. And all of this comes out at the other end in the outputs when a user uses a machine learning program. Because the user can put in prompts that talk about line quality, talk about lighting, talk about color palette, talk about all of the expressive choices that went into the quote-unquote data that went into the system. So clearly, there has to be expressive copying. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I sure as hell don't want to argue with Pam Samuelson. But from an artist perspective, from the Graphic Artists Guild perspective, how is this fair use? It's resulting in a model that is certainly going to put artists out of business.
I just want to see if there's a picture, a question in the way back to also increase our family. Yes. There's going to be a mic showing up. Sorry to the mic. I pulled a fast one on the mic deliverers.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really love the presentation today, and I have a question like this. So, considering someone who have an idea, like he wants to create some kind of painting, but he does not know how to really do the sketchings and paint, and then he put the prompt in Midjourney and adjust the prompt like 3 weeks. He really enjoyed it, and he talks to the Midjourney, and then he selected one final thing he or him they think it's great from like 10,000 of images Midjourney generated, and this is a piece of art. And comparing this to Jeff Koontz art, he does not make his art by hand. He didn't sketch it. He probably just sent his idea to the technicians, and then they make the objects out of that. So I'm wondering, what is the difference between these two? Jeff Koontz doesn't know probably how to do that big thing, and it's a technician do that. He communicate with the technician and get the final result and put it as art. And I think today, most of people think that is art. Jeff Koontz is an artist, although I probably don't think so. But I'm wondering, if that can be an art, how could we think the Midjourneys adjust? So Midjourney can be that artist, technician, and he tell the Midjourney to do that. And Midjourney use his trainings or techniques to produce the thing I wanted to have. So I just want to see the point of your and other people think about this. And I'm wondering about this for a long time. Thank you.
I'm not speaking for the Graphic Artists Guild when I say that I personally am not really sure what I think of Jeff Koontz's artistic ability myself, although I do love those giant, flower sculptures. But, first of all, is sticking in some text prompts and having the machine create an image for you, are you really the artist? You ask about Jeff Koontz and his process. Now, when we consider the making of a work of art, when we have someone directing someone to create something else, there is, in fact, creative involvement in the direction, in the curation, in the finishing of that artwork. And I'm saying this with a slightly bad taste in the back of my mouth because, I have a lot of problem with artists like Jeff Koontz. However, having said that, there is a line that can be crossed when you're considering the involvement of someone who is producing something and following constant direction from someone like Jeff Koontz. And Jeff Koontz himself, I do not think anything passes out of his workshop without getting his final stamp of approval on it. There is a very long iterative process that he engages in. Lastly, I don't know what his artistic ability is. I don't imagine that he started off with a workshop of people. For that matter, Andy Warhol didn't create his silk screens himself. He had a workshop produce those as well. If we're going to cast that eye of aspersion on Jeff Koontz, we need to perhaps look at Andy Warhol as well. It's a common practice for fine artists to have workshops. We're speaking from the perspective of graphic artists and illustrators and designers. I promise you, with the incomes we have, we don't have workshops.
Yes.
Hi there. Thank you both so much for your presentations. Prior to coming to Stanford, I was a professional and choreographer and dancer in New York City, two things that I still do, but not as much because PhD life is hard. And we don't have a precedent for being able to copyright our work as choreographers, something that has been hotly debated quite recently, especially with single ladies, TikTok, and the proliferation of certain styles of dance, and not only styles of dance, but also kind of inherited movement qualities that have taken people 25 years of labor and strenuous physical activity in order to be able to develop. So what can performative artists, specifically people who are working in domains, I mean, music has a little bit more of a precedent, but working in domains like dance or theater, for that matter, be able to learn from graphic artists who have a very clear precedent of being able to copyright their work, and how might our sort of performance domains have even more ambiguity when it comes to our ability to be able to translate and share our actual output into some of these models that can indeed learn our styles of motion?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just to give my just first blush reaction, and this is totally outside of my depth because I've never thought about this before. But if you want to learn anything from graphic artists, I would say learn that if you're behind the curve on establishing copyright rules for yourself and advocating for yourself and developing coalitions, that's going to hurt in the long run. So if that is a big problem in your industry, start yesterday on trying to get information out about it and talk to people about it. How realistic it is to copyright things like that, I have no idea. It does sound very complicated. I will say, just from questions that I've asked the Copyright Office, that they do care very much about how robustly can you prove that you concretized something into a particular form of expression, right? So when I think of single ladies, it's like it's unmissable, and it's pretty, it's very specific. So that might be an angle to look into. That's what I've got.
And where you can't leverage copyright, and I mean, let's be realistic, our copyright system in the United States does not serve individual creators that well, even those of us who create works that do easily fall under the copyright status. But then you look for other mechanisms to protect the integrity of your work. You can talk about ethical uses, you can talk about professional practices. Where the copyright system fails, where the technology fails, that's where professionals in a field then start leveraging professional practices and ethical standards to set up those guardrails where the outside systems aren't supporting you. It's not a great answer, but it's the best we can do.
People do care about those. They do care about those.
Go ahead, right behind. Yep.
It's okay if I go? I'm going to stand. Hi. All right, so I may reveal myself as having the ethical instincts of a hyena, but
I doubt there's any
I'm
true
on a panel.
hyenas
I'm on
in
a
this
panel
room.
this
By the way,
afternoon
one
about
of the
ethics.
great quotes of the day. I hope you all
It's
wrote it
really
down.
good. It's really good.
Rivaled only by narrow alley of my ire.
But very nice.
I get upset. Sometimes I get upset. I don't know what to say.
All right. I'm I want to point out a couple of things that you said, Stephen, that I thought were really insightful. First, everything is insightful, and there's big issues here. I want to claim that there are a couple of confounding issues here that are both really important. One of them is the rights of content creators, which must not be violated. And the other is the question of whether generative AI can give rise to artistic expression. I actually think art's quite robust to technological shifts. I'm in music. If I go to NAMM, which is the major music tech show, usually in LA, you walk around there for an hour and you're like, oh, we can do push-button music generation. We've been able to do it for 30 years, right? It's just not very interesting. You correctly said, or I agree, that we will wake up with a large language model hangover. I've used that phrase hangover too. I think it's exactly perfect, right? We're feasting on this. You also said, that you're going to return to painting and, that craft matters, or I wrote it down as craft matters. And I think it's completely true. So what I would claim is that as these tools evolve, including exactly the kind of tools that you're upset about, and I understand that. Let's just take current painters out of the loop and hypothetically train a model on only art from 70 years ago and before, whatever.
Okay.
I think we'll see art, and the art that we'll see will come from other artists breaking this technology in interesting ways. That may be from prompt tuning, that may be from some sort of post-processing, that may be from some sort of fine-tuning. And once they start doing that, that moves, it's a non-zero-sum game, and people are going to be more interested in that, and it's going to render the boring old, oh, look, I made a prompt that has a corgi dog sitting inside of a sushi house, which is one that I actually tweeted. I'd be like, yeah, whatever, man, that's boring. And so I'm actually quite hopeful about the future of art, because I think it's about humanity and humans communicating with each other. I'm also very concerned about the IP issues that we're talking about here, but I wanted to voice a hopeful message about this, and I wonder, since you did mention the hangover and that you think people will return to drawing, are you hopeful as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that my first instinct, I don't feel a lot of resistance to anything that you said. I mean, I'm very agnostic, I feel, as to whether AIs can do things that truly surprise us and really push the boundaries. And I feel with certainty that people have already been moved by AI works, and that people will continue to be moved by AI works. My problem is really just with the unethical practices. Like I said, now narrow alley of my ire. Like, if those can be resolved, if those disappear, me personally, I'm basically hands off. I'm going to disappear into the forest, and you guys can come learn drawing with me if you want. But like, I'm really hands off on trying to control those systems at that point. And the question is, yeah, just how difficult is it really going to be? Because it begs huge questions about our regulatory systems. How difficult is it really going to be to arrive at something ethical? But yes, if we just calm down on the questions of how difficult it would be, and we assume we get there, for me personally, it's like, that's fine. That doesn't mean it's for everyone. Like I said to an earlier question, it's not, I don't know if it'll be for me, but hands off at that point.
And then our final question here. Yes.
Thank you. Obviously, first of all, Steve, thank you very much. I really think your talk is very moving.
Thank you.
And everybody feel the injustice for the artist, right? Whether it's legal or not legally solvable, it's hard to say right now. Nobody have any solution. But do you think that it would be fair to lay a form of taxation on the generative AI kind of technology, which reap everyone's effort, and put that as a fund to promote the people who are, in lack of better words, suppressed, so that more people, like for instance, the artists are being shortchanged right now, but there's no way to compensate in the short term how to solve that problem. Right. But then we shouldn't prevent new artists from going into that field for fear of no jobs. So is there some quick solution to not cause any disruption of talents goes to necessary field that human need, such as art? Because I can just see the computer-generated art doesn't have, like you said, those individual-based art is irrelevant to others. But art is about connecting people's spirit. Mm-hmm. That's the issue that is going to be missing by individualized art that is totally satisfy my individual need. But that's not the point of art. So, I mean, do you think some form of taxation to encourage people to continue this, this career would be a solution?
I think it may be part of a possible solution for sure, and there's definitely a lot of people have discussed in other contexts taxing people who own automation machines to redistribute wealth. I think this also dovetails a bit with ideas of collective licensing, which can be done in a non-specific way to remunerate a class of people who people know are sort of being taken advantage of in these situations. The question is, how would you redistribute it? And does it actually amount to something like a living wage? Like that, I'm not just worried about, kind of like your previous question, like, are we really going to let an obsession with the letter of the law drive us into a more boring future that nobody wants? Is that really what we want? All right, the jobs that I'm talking about, it's like, if you can pull off an art career and art job, it's a miracle. And the jobs that I'm talking about, like, yes, there's a lot of people with low wages, low rates, but just, you can have a good life, right? If you pull off your career, you can have a really good life doing stuff that excites you and that fulfills you and makes you feel creative every day. That is not, we've got to stop thinking about it as job statistics. It's like, that's a job that could save someone's life, right? That's really something that like will be the foundation for pride and self-esteem and a lack of existential angst. So things like collective licensing, that if it comes out that that's going to be redistributing $1,000, $2,000 a year to an artist, it's like, we found some remuneration, but we're basically making this, again, not just a number, but a substantive, important part of human culture irrelevant to the next generation. They're just not going to see it as something worth investing huge amounts of time in. So I think it may be part of a solution, but I think that I really think the bigger, like, what we want out of the world questions are super important here.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly, yeah, there are collective licensing schemes. It's not a tax, and it's not supporting suppressed people. It is paying artists for the use of their work. It's fair. It's what we're entitled to. But if we're going to look at a larger future, how are we going to develop this so that we are, in fact, preserving and protecting human creativity? The technology sector has to be an active, aggressive partner in this, in working to develop this future. And I think we need to start rethinking some of the catchphrases we're using. For example, I hear a lot about the democratization of design, the democratization of the creation of art. Well, why the hell shouldn't the people who put up with harsh criticism, who put up with professional failure, who put up with all of the trauma and difficulty that goes into becoming an artist, why shouldn't they be compensated for it? And if you're democratizing it so that somebody can sit in and enter in a few text prompts and have, ooh, a delightful image come out of Midjourney, and look at me, I created this. Well, you didn't. If we're going to have that at the expense of viable careers for artists, what are we democratizing to? Is it democracy if you're inviting people into a non-viable career? And if you are building the technology off of the concerted labor of all of the artists who invested so much into creating the images that were ingested into the system, is that democracy? Because to me, that sounds like Orwell, where the people who did the hardest work, the most strategic work, the difficult work, their output is churned out and spewed out for the greater good without getting any compensation for it. And I don't think that's what we really want in the future. By the way, we do see a future where there can be viable, productive careers for people working as AI artists. But it has to be a choice, and the human creator has to be protected in that system.
Well, please join me in thanking our panelists.